Hello and welcome to The Ripple Impact, the podcast where we dive into those fascinating, unexpected ripples that change everything in business and in life. Today's guest is someone who spent over 30 years in marketing and insight roles across General Mills, Johnson & Johnson, Kraft Foods, Cereal Partners Worldwide and Kellanova, uncovering what really drives human behaviour and helping some of the world's biggest brands act on it. Simon Pollock. Simon is a global insights and analytics leader whose work has shaped everything from Pringles to Häagen-Dazs to Old Paso to Kellogg's and to Nature Valley. He's not only built dynamic teams and driven marketing effectiveness scale, but he's also stayed deeply rooted in the human side of it all, from behavioural science to sustainability to the power of one-to-one connections. Simon's ripple moments stretch from answering customer phone calls for a Sri Lankan tea company to influencing global board decisions. Simon, welcome to the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us today.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, firstly, thanks for having me. It's such a pleasure to be part of something so amazing, and congratulations to you for
thank you.
And for the Ripple Impact. It's such an incredible initiative.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind. Simon, you and I had the pleasure of working together at General Mills, and actually you were my boss, and this dates back to 2010 when we worked together. Incredible to have known you for all that time. But I wanted to start right at the beginning and with a story that you told me that really stuck with me around the Sri Lankan family business and the founder that really inspired you. Can you wind us back to the very start of your career and what set you off on your path and your journey to insights?
The Sri Lankan tea company is a great part. That was probably 10 years into my career, actually. I was lucky enough to work for a family-owned business. They were based out of Sri Lanka. I was in Australia at the time and working on their Australian business. But what was most fascinating about that was I worked for a guy, and he's since passed. He has passed the business on to his children, and they're running the business. They've been incredibly successful. They're in over 80 countries worldwide, either with their own brand or with supplying for other brands. His story was really incredible because he launched his own brand in Australia, and that was before I joined him. And he had built the whole brand off his life and his personality. And what he did is he would always ensure that he had the best quality product in there. He would put a little letter in every single box of tea, and that letter would change every month or every other month. And it would be the story of his life, his children growing up, his grandchildren. And what happened is he created a dialogue with his consumers directly, and they would contact him. And so my job initially with him was he had a phone number on that letter, and they would call the phone number, and there was I answering that call. And it really taught me the importance of having that dialogue, but listening to the feedback. And these people were often just calling to share their stories. And it really got me really close to understanding people and understanding the stories that drive those people, but also the engagement they have with the brand, the product. And it's more than just having a cup of tea. Interestingly enough, in his letter, he would often write, "Make yourself a cup of tea and read my story."
Oh,
so that was kind
lovely.
of the link back to the tea as well. But it was an incredible experience. That role, I was there for a few years. It ended up being a team of people who were looking after the direct communication with consumers. And we did lots of really fascinating learning where he would send us tea, and we'd go to a trade fair or a consumer fair actually, and we'd set up a tea stand and we'd be serving tea to people. And I remember, each day I'd sent him back a response saying, well, this one did really well, this one people weren't that keen on. And it really got me thinking and got me working in a way to tap into the connections that people have with the product, and also looking at the behaviors that they have. Albeit they might have drunk a lot more of one version, but they may have said they liked another version. And so looking at the behavior behind that. It was a great experience, one that I still to this day use all of the principles that he taught me. That notion of every single person is important, every single consumer is important, and it's important to make those connections, albeit make those connections on scale as well. But to go right back to the start of my career, I originally started working in insurance. So I've spent most of my career looking around and just following things that interested me. And I was lucky enough to get a scholarship from an insurance company who sponsored effectively my studies, which was really beneficial. And I remember starting there and going in, and this was in the early 90s, when offices at that time had, or certainly in the financial sector, offices at that time had cubicles. They would have walls that would be about this high. So when you're sitting down, wall, but when you stood up, you could see people. I would come into work and I would spend a lot of my time, a little bit like a meerkat. I'd be peering the wall. I remember distinctly that my boss, after a couple of colleagues took me aside and was like, you can't do that. You have to sit down, come into work, do your work. We were doing highly statistical work. We were in a team that was calculating all the policies that didn't fit with the normal output and had to be recalculated. And it was at that moment when I went, okay, maybe this is not for me. Maybe this is not the place I need to be. Maybe my personality didn't necessarily suit that work environment, or maybe I didn't suit that work environment. I was smart enough, though, to stick it out, to finish my studies, to figure out how to work in that particular environment. But it was also that ripple moment taught me that it's always important to keep looking around and keep being that meerkat where you're kind of looking around. And that's guided my career right throughout. I went from that, went to Johnson & Johnson, where I went into effectively a category analyst role, where I was doing things like planogramming and pricing strategies. And yeah, that was a great fit with my analytical skill set, but still probably wasn't a great fit for my personality. And I was looking around, and from there I saw roles in sales. And so I moved into more of a sales role when I was at Sara Lee. And then from there I saw, there's marketing roles, and I moved into marketing roles where I spent the bulk of the first half of my career in commercial and marketing roles. And actually, when I came to General Mills, I was in a marketing role, but still looking around and thinking, where is that true passion of mine? How do I get to that true passion of understanding people, understanding behavior, not only people who are consumers of our products, who purchase our products, but actually people that you work with and the teams that you develop around. And from there, I discovered the wonderful world of insight. And what I found really magical about that world is it was a beautiful collision of my historical analytical skills, particularly today. The analytics behind a lot of what we do is critically important. But also the other side of it is the understanding of the behavior behind the analytics, or behavior behind what people are saying, and the art of being able to see that, and balancing the art and the science of effectively what we need to do. And so I've spent the second half of my career in those types of roles, looking at how brands can grow by truly understanding the behavior that they're trying to influence or change, how a brand can fit in with the behavior of their consumers, but also how to build teams that can truly get behind the behaviors of people and ultimately create stories that can influence the businesses to make decisions in order to benefit those consumer behaviors. So that's been the journey. I'm now in a role here at Kellanova, looking at the global insights community. Big part of my journey over the past 10 years has been about transformation, how we transform the way we gather learning, the way we extract insight, and most importantly, how we influence decisions in the business. So the data or the learning, extract the insight, and then really position it and create the stories that really impulse leaders to make decisions and to make better decisions for both the business and their consumers. It's been a fun journey. Yeah. I've spent most of my time being a bit of a meerkat, looking around, seeing. And what's really interesting, and I find the meerkat analogy really interesting, because what a meerkat's looking for, they're not looking for opportunity, they're actually looking for danger. I find that really interesting. And that got me thinking about my entire search for what am I destined to do? What do I want to do? What do I enjoy doing? But also on the lookout for that danger and how do I protect myself? It's really interesting because there's lots of stories throughout my career, but I want to reflect on one that happened more recently. I was in a meeting a couple of years back. It was a very small group of people, 3 or 4 of us in the meeting, and it was with a very senior leader in an organization. At the time, our HR team had sent out a note saying we're encouraging people to put pronouns on their email signatures. I didn't give it a thought. I was like, yeah, that's cool. In this meeting, it was an informal meeting, this senior leader, someone even more senior than me, said, did you get that email? She was quite dismissive about it. I'm not putting my pronouns on my email. People know I'm a woman. It doesn't make any sense. And I was a bit shocked. I was shocked that a senior person would have that response. But I was also shocked by what I did, which was I did nothing. I said nothing. I sat there and I just was stunned. And I left that and I reflected quite a lot about why did what she said shock me, but also why did my reaction or lack of reaction shock me? That was a perfect opportunity for me to turn that into a learning experience for everybody, for myself. It was a perfect opportunity for me to say, well, actually, yes, you're lucky. You are a person who has pronouns that match your appearance, that match your birth. Not all of us are that lucky, but I didn't. I just let it pass. And it took me quite a while to process why was that the case. As I thought about it, I got to this position that I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I didn't want to say anything because it would bring attention to me. And why might that be bad? My pronouns match my birth. It had nothing to do with the actual topic. It had nothing to do with that. It was more, I didn't want to draw attention to myself because I didn't want to potentially open any conversation about my identity or who I was and how I showed up at work. And I just thought that that was such a missed opportunity. But also I went through a period of quite sadness and quite disappointment to why am I like that? And that got me reflecting right back through all those moments right throughout my career where I may have sat there and may not have said or may not have come forward or may not have done something. Albeit this was a very small example, but it was a ripple that got me thinking in a way, why was that the case? And that took me on a journey of discovery, of thinking about those and what does it take to be successful in corporate organizations? And how did I become successful? Or how did I get to where I was? And it's quite sad that even in today's environment, very senior leaders of organizations are still very homogenous. I don't know how many times throughout my career I've had someone pull me aside and say, you can't be the meerkat. You got to show up with executive presence. You've got to behave like this. You've got to do this. And admittedly, it is less and less now than it was earlier on. It's one of those things that still exists today. Our leaders, as sad as it seems, if you want to progress and if you want to be a senior leader of an organization, you almost have to fit that mold, which is sad to say in today's world. However, why is that the case? This got me thinking about the consumer behavior element for this and the human behavior. If you think about where we all came from, how we survived. We survived by being in packs, by being with people that are the same as us, by eliminating those that are different to us, by literally eliminating those that are different to us. Even today, this still happens. All the wars around the world, they're always based on a difference. I'm different to you. I have a different ideology. And that is very much human nature. There is a natural survival instinct that kicks in.
I was going to say, the moment with that leader where you didn't say anything, you went into fight or flight mode. And you went into flight and you were like, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to bring up a topic that I'm not ready to talk about. Like, I don't want to be confronted. So there was absolutely a flight moment. And back to that very early days meerkat moment and you peering. It's interesting you say the meerkat is about danger, but I almost think the opposite was true at the beginning of your career, because that was almost like connection, talking to your fellow colleagues and building that camaraderie around the office. And as you said, you stayed in that role, but then eventually you left because it didn't fit you. There's a responsibility for leaders to build that safety and that psychological safety around themselves, but also around their teams as well. So I'm not surprised in that reaction.
You're so right. And, I spent pretty much the first half of my career moving from place to place. I used to say to myself, are you moving because you're running away from something or running towards something? And the reality is it's a bit of both. Not quite right for me, so I'm going to go away from it. I have no idea whether that's right for me, but it's interesting, and I'm going to head in that direction. And then the last half of my career, when I found the world of insight and analytics, and I was like, this is me. This is the right skill set for me. And I found organizations and places where I could thrive. And I was successful by ultimately presenting a version of myself that I knew would be accepted and I knew that would be successful. And as part of this discovery, I uncovered a book called Covering. It was a great book and a great story, and everybody wants to read it.
Yeah, tell us the little synopsis of the story for anyone. I haven't read it, but give us the little synopsis.
It's been a while since I've read it, so I'm going to paraphrase. And this is what I took from it. So somebody else will read it and they might have a different interpretation. It's based on the principle that we are really all drawn to people like us. It's a safe place. And so if you're different, you might be a person of color, you might be queer, you might be a female in a man's world. Like, we're all different in some way. And what you do is, as your survival instinct, you cover who you are and you present the version that you believe places you in the safest environment. So basically you mirror those around you to try and you cover your true self. As I've started to think about this, I've thought about all those places where I've covered myself, and we all do it. Every single person does this. And what I love about this book is it talks about the amount of energy it takes to cover, because you're basically in a constant fight or flight mode. You're going, are they going to find out? Are they going to find out about the relationship? I've got to constantly present. And the energy it takes to do that, imagine if you could channel all that energy into the world.
Into your work.
Just to accelerate. But
wow.
When I look at corporations and leaderships today, they're all still very homogenous. And so we still haven't broken this fully. But there is a real movement of people bringing them true selves to work. But the sad reality is you can bring your true self to work. May well be a consequence of that you may not end up being the most senior, but you'll probably end up being the happiest person in the business. And so there's a nice balance.
Or then is it the right business for you?
Yeah.
Because I don't believe that people can't fully be themselves. Maybe they just can't fully be themselves in a certain environment. It takes bravery to say, this is me, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
And either try and change the organization from the inside out. And that there's a huge amount of power in that, but a lot of responsibility. Or brave enough to say, you know what, this doesn't fit me, this doesn't suit me, it doesn't match my values, my motivations, my style, my communication. I want to be the meerkat. I don't want to sit in my little cubicle and type away and not speak to anyone all day. It takes bravery to step away from that and to go, no, this isn't for me.
It does. And I had another ripple moment actually only this weekend. I was at an event, a festival, and there was a performer singing, and he had a great backstory, but he said this one thing halfway through the performance. It was a musical performance, and he said this one thing, and he stopped and he said, "We all have one job in the world, and only we can do it. We have one job in the world, and that is you, no one else."
Yeah.
And then he went on and talked about how there's so much anxiety in the world, and all that's built on how we're effectively covering to fit in. What I've had to recognize is all of us cover, but to various degrees. So I'm gay. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. If you imagine that time, basically being gay was presented to you as a death sentence. And that death sentence was either you would die because you were gay, or you would die because you would be beaten to death. So particularly where I grew up, rural Australia, nobody had seen people like me. It was a very small community. They were there, they existed, but they were all covering and doing a better job than I was doing at the time. But if you think about that, even that covering was a survival instinct for me. I was like, if I'm not covering who I really am, I'm going to get beaten up or worse. I never believed that I hid who I was. If someone asked me a question, I answered them honestly. And I remember early in my career rocking up at work and they'd come in and they'd be like, "Oh, did you enjoy that football match on the weekend?" And I was like, "Yeah, it was great," thinking, "What are you talking about?" But
I didn't watch it.
You know what I would do? This is crazy because I love sport and I actually love all forms of sport now, and I've grown an appreciation for it. But back then, that's not me. And what was really interesting is I would, on the weekend, on a Sunday night before I went to work on Monday, I would study what happened in the football teams so that on Monday morning when I went to work and someone asked me a question, I could say something that would not reveal that I didn't like football at the time. Imagine the energy of doing that every Sunday night.
I know. It's true because there's an element of social currency in it, isn't there? Because it's like the conversations or the topical things that people want to talk about, and feeling you have to have that passion or have that interest in something, and that's part of the social currency. What's interesting in covering, as you said, is where it serves you and it helps you because it's safety, it's protection. And when it doesn't serve you, where you are holding yourself back to a point where you're burning out, you're spending so much energy, you are not being authentically yourself, and you're constantly worrying about what are people thinking, what am I projecting, have I said too much, have I said too little? That must be exhausting.
Yeah, it is exhausting. The contrast of that, so my story before about my need to cover for survival, or at least my perceived need to cover for survival. Was I really in any danger? Yeah, there have been times when I have been in danger. There have been times when I have gone, this is not safe. But they are the minority. On the contrast of that, I'm quite lucky. I'm a middle-aged white man. Like, the world was built for middle-aged white men. If I put on that front, sad as I say,
I know.
on that front, I can step into that mold and I can very easily find my way through. So I did spend a lot of my life going, if I cover this part and enhance that part, it'll serve me well. So there are many people that are even more different than I am, and I recognize that. And I like what you said before around the energy it takes to cover, but knowing when it serves you and not. I would love to see a world where it's not needed. The reality is human nature and human behavior says it will always be there. But what I love and what I'm building an awareness for is, how is it required? How is it required to serve me? How do I break down when it doesn't? How do I break it away when it doesn't serve me? And more importantly, as I get more senior in my career, I was thinking senior in age there, but I didn't want to say old. As I get, how do I create environments where others around me don't have to come to the extent that I perceive that I have?
Yeah. And that's back to your pronoun example, isn't it? Because you were in a situation where you weren't fighting for that representation, but there's a moment to educate, to allow others that are in that situation to have a voice, and almost creating a stage for people and giving space to people and representing other groups that you don't have to be in to support them or advocate for them or create opportunities for their voices to be heard. And it's a tricky thing because it's not always talked about.
Yeah.
So people don't always have the language to do it in a way that is respectful, but still corporately appropriate. And like you said, it was a senior person. So how you do that in a way that is constructive to that individual, but also to you, it is a tricky balance of how you bring these topics up in the workplace, particularly. And with friends and family, it's different. But in a workplace, it's how do you create that space and that safety for the others, even if you're not in that particular group that you want to represent.
And it did get me thinking. This was only in the last 2 years, 18 months ago. So it's very recent. But it did get me thinking of my survival instinct is not to draw attention to myself. Something that I've had to deal with and I've had to face into and go, well, hang on a minute, if you're not drawing attention to yourself, then no one's seeing the beauty and the good that I do bring.
Yeah.
How do I start to ensure that I'm allowing myself, the work that I do and everything that I do to be open? And it reminds me of another Ripple moment where I was in a meeting. I had just newly been promoted into this role of leading a team. There was a meeting with a broader group and someone said, this great work. One of my team prodded me in the side and said, this is when you stand up and say what we're doing. And I just sat there. And afterwards, you really should have said something about the work we do. And I'm like, I know I should have said something. Literally been in this role for 5 minutes and I just didn't have the courage. I'm sorry. And said to me at the time, she was like, okay, that's fine. But know that we've got your back. If you had stood up and said something, then we would have had permission. And even this is 20 years ago, but it still was
No, sure.
Like, how do you have the courage to come forward and to present? Way? How do you have the safety, whether it's psychological or physical safety or perceived physical safety?
And not always having to feel that all that pressure is on you, because I was thinking in that moment, even though you've been in the role for 5 minutes, maybe you could have said, I'd love to talk about what my team is doing, but as you know, I've only been here for 5 minutes and I would actually really like one of my team to represent, because I think it's really important that you hear what we're doing, but I'm probably not best to talk about it. Would someone in my team like to say something? So you're not having to feel that you have to personally take all the pressure of saying something, but maybe just opening the door for others. Because I think sometimes as leaders, and I've done this, is where you feel like you have to be the one that has all the answers, and we don't.
It is so true. And it's something that at the time I didn't have the awareness or capacity, or if I did, I wasn't brave enough I wasn't confident enough in myself to do it. I probably do it actually intellectually. And if I thought about it, I probably thought, yes. What I love about this story, or what I find ironic about this story, is I have spent pretty much my entire career, even before I came in the insights world, trying to understand behavior and the difference between what people do and what they say. And I wasn't doing it for myself. This whole thing makes it even more important and critical. In our world, in the world of insight, in the world of understanding behavior, that I've spent most of the last 10, if not 15 years, really deep diving and thinking, just because someone says something, why are they saying that? They're saying it because that's what they think you want to hear, or that's what they think is socially acceptable, or that's what they think is the right thing to say. So in the world, particularly in the world of research that I've lived in, you hear so many things, and I've spent pretty much all of my last 15 years going in organizations and saying, just because someone said that, it's not true. Or actually, it may well be true. It's what they perceive. But look at what they're doing. They're doing the complete opposite of what they've just said. That's the bit that we need to focus in on. This notion of this gap between what we say and do applies not only to us as leaders, not only to us as teams and organizations, but equally as how it impacts those that the products and services that we're offering to. And it's so weird that I spent so much time focusing on that external element that I didn't actually come back and think about it internally, or I was thinking about it, but maybe not acting on it. I'm fully aware now when I am covering, and I'm fully aware. And you know what? I don't beat myself up about it. I'm like, you weren't safe then. It's okay. It's okay. You didn't have the psychological safety, or you didn't feel like, or you're tired, or they.
Absolutely.
Whereas I used to beat myself up 2 years ago when I was like, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you take action? And now I don't beat myself up. I just go, well, okay, the timing wasn't right or something wasn't right, but what can I do to either buy Or what could I do to make sure that I set myself up in future?
And what do you think leaders and organizations can do to allow this psychological safety? Because as you said, there is an element of covering which is for your own personal protection, and you should absolutely keep that. But where it's holding you back and it's taking you into a disingenuous space where you can't have a voice where you should and you could, what can leaders do to help us break that down?
I can only talk about what I've learned. And my personal learning is if you are not doing that for yourself, it doesn't matter what you say or what you do around you, no one else will feel safe for themselves. And I've always felt that I've been a pretty open book, and I've always felt like I've been pretty transparent, and I have, to the limit of where there are some certain things where I may not have gone as far. So my advice is you've got to really think about where are times when you are covering, where are times when you're feeling vulnerable, and understand them. Firstly, recognize them, understand them, and then go, okay, if I'm like this, chances are the rest of the team will be having similar experiences. They won't be the same as yours because their whole world is, their background is different. And creating that space where you are able to break down your covers or come through from your covers or remove them, then you actually provide the psychological safety for others. They can see it in you, they can mirror it. I think that is the number one thing. The second thing is, and that's the journey I've been on for years, I've been trying to break through and recognize it. But the second thing, which actually is the thing that people tend to do first, is what I tried to do first, is you try and recognize the difference in others and create a safe space for them and make sure they have a voice and they feel heard and they can come forward. That works. But if you're not truly there, they'll only come so far. And they'll present you with what they think you want to see. So I've learned to flip it. I've got to start with me first. And both of them are important together. But how do you create safe spaces? How do you celebrate? I'll give you a simple example. The clothing that we wear. So when I started working...
I literally talked about that in the Nina episode.
Yes. Yeah. Clothing that you wear. When I started working, I dressed exactly like I thought corporate people needed to dress. Because if I came into the office and someone was wearing something that might have been a bit out there, and 9 times out of 10 it was probably a woman, there'd be a look. And then the next time she'd come in, well, she'd have a more corporate outfit on. So how do you, instead of everyone being, and I would see this and I'd be like, oh God, they're judging that person. Or they'd be pulled aside and said, that's not appropriate. This is before. This is in the days where it's a time. In fact, I had a few of those conversations given to me. It's not appropriate for you to wear this to work. So how do you, instead of having that conversation, when you see that happening, how do you go to the person and go, hey, you look great. I love the fact you've wear this. Tell me about your necklace. You can create that. Very simple example, but you can really create that safety. Even things like that great question. Monday, everyone comes in, oh, did you have a great weekend? My response is always, yeah. Now, with my team or people that I work with, I will share a bit more, but in general forums. And then someone else might share something. But how do you just go that one step further to open the door to allow others to join you in that?
And what you're talking about is role modeling the behavior that you want to give permission for others to do. So if you can really put that out there, it allows other people to do the same. And that takes vulnerability. Vulnerability is an absolute superpower. But I think vulnerability is terrifying for most people because they're scared if they say too much or they do too much or they show too much of themselves. What are the consequences of that? And as humans, we fear consequence. And therefore, vulnerability feels terrifying. But how you can do it in little increments and little steps. It's not going to be one day you're in your little cubicle and then the next day you're going to be like, guess what? And you share your full self. It might be a little bit intimidating, but how you take these little steps to be you and be vulnerable and to share yourself.
That's totally right. I would build on that to say recognizing when you get it wrong. Because vulnerability or the anxiety that goes with that is often fear of failure or fear of rejection or worse, fear of safety. Technically, in most work environments, the fear of safety shouldn't necessarily be there, but it's fear of rejection or fear of failure. And you can model that by, you know what, I got it wrong. Actually, I probably shouldn't have done this. And in my reflection, that example I told before about pronouns, saying, I got it wrong. I probably should have in that moment, but I couldn't. I just couldn't in that moment. And so now what could I do differently? Well, the first thing I did is I put my pronouns straight on my email. I was like, okay, I'm going to model the behavior and see. How do you, when you don't get it right or when something does go wrong or you have something that doesn't work, how do you be open about that and transparent about that? I've had a failure here. I've had a misstep, and guess what? I've taken the consequence, and I'll wear it on the chin, and I'm learning from it. And how do you show that it's okay to be vulnerable? It's okay to take a risk. There are consequences. Things can go wrong, but you know what? You can move on from that, and you can learn from that. And modeling that, I think, is equally important. There's nothing worse than a leader that's perfect.
It just doesn't exist either.
Well, no.
Or they become across as a robot, and you have no connection to them because you're like, who is this person that is like...
They think they exist, or what are the point? They're covering to be perfect.
Wow, yeah.
Probably, or they're covering to be, they are pretending to show that everything is well. Some of the best leaders I've worked for are people, when business performance is down, they're like, you know what? There's no excuses here. Let's get to the bottom of what's going on. Let's figure out how to do it. There's no rose-tinted glasses. It's like, yep, I'm here, I'm leading this, and frankly, I'm failing because the business is not performing.
Yeah.
And what that does is that really encourages everybody to get in, and everyone's in it together. Whereas when things go wrong and there's rose-tinted glasses, or worse still, the finger pointing of...
Yeah, I was going to say the worst, blame culture.
Blame culture. I'm still yet to determine whether blame culture is worse or rose-tinted glasses is worse, because I think they're both bad in different ways. But, you know, business performance is bad, but this is great, and this is great, and this is great. Actually, does that even matter when this is not, you know, the overall?
And people can see straight through that as well. Your employees aren't stupid if the numbers are going down. You're going, isn't it great? Well, this is happening over here. We're not talking about the real issue here. People want that. People want that transparency. They want that communication. They don't want the polished town hall that pretends everything's okay. They want the realness, so that then the right issue comes up, so then we can address it. People want that from leaders. And what you're talking about is human leadership.
Yeah, exactly. Human leadership. And we're seeing it more and more, but there is still a big gap and a long way to go.
Yeah.
What I experience is a lot of talk. I don't necessarily experience the action to the full extent. And that's the journey I'm on of how do I not just talk but do? How do I not only show up authentically, but also show up and provide safety for those around, so that we can really just grow together. I love the idea of growth mindset. You know, I had a boss one time who said to me, if you're not growing, you die. We're all in decay. We're all dying. We're all getting older bit by bit.
No, we're not.
I know. And I was like, what a fantastic notion. So therefore, how do I continue to spark that growth and spark that learning in myself and those around me? And when businesses are not growing, they are dying. So many case studies of businesses that I watched the movie recently on BlackBerry, and how BlackBerry died and reinvented itself as a different company. So I love this notion of growth mindset, and how do we use growth mindset to help us to continue to learn from mistakes? Always, I believe the best learning comes from places of darkness or places of failure, but it's easier when things are growing and positive.
Yeah, of course.
From the learning is not there to the same degree. So it's how do we truly live up to that?
Yeah, it's interesting because in the podcast with Philippa White, she talks about intrapreneurs. They're not entrepreneurs, but intrapreneurs, and this idea of people within organizations, especially big organizations. There is such a powerful ability for individuals, and you don't want to be the lone wolf, but there's such a power for people to change organizations from the inside out. And I'm not saying, Simon, it's all on your shoulders, go. It takes a lot of people. That lovely metaphor, it takes a village. I think it's true, but it starts with someone, and then the ripple impact will come, and people will gravitate to it, and change can come, but it has to start somewhere.
Yeah, it does. And one of my other great passions, I have a couple of great passions. One is understanding consumer behavior. The other one is teams. I fundamentally have always believed that we, as humans, we're pack animals. So actually, team is built into our DNA, but we're going to function as teams because there's no psychological safety, or there's no... So I'm really fascinated around how do you create teams and how do you create environments where teams thrive together. And that's what you were saying before, and being able to make mistakes together, to learn together, to grow together, and to come together as teams. You can create the power of a team is far greater than the power of the individuals. And being able to do that, and being able to ensure that everyone on that team belongs, has a sense of belonging, has a sense of their own self-identity. So you don't morph into a team and become one. You actually are a team of individuals that collectively create a power greater than anything else. And that's one of my great passions, unlocking that in people and creating the environment where you can do that. I want diversity in my team. I want different thinking. I want people in my team who tell me that I'm wrong. I'll probably cry or tell them to go away. I want them to tell me I'm wrong, and I want them to take a stand, because that's when I reflect, and that's when I go, okay, I'm probably not right here. Well, I'm not right here, obviously. How might I pivot? And that's how we get better results. I always feel that someone who bring to you and say, I don't agree with this, or this is not happening, as awkward and as difficult as those things are, particularly if you're the leader and your team is coming to you and saying, this is not right, or we don't agree with this. What you do with that information and how you use it is so critical in ensuring that the team then feels like, you know what? And it might be that I actually don't agree with that individual, and how do we get to a mutual place that could be beneficial. But I think team dynamics and building of teams is critically important, and you can only do that by understanding yourself. And this is what brings me back to truly, how do you understand yourself? How do you understand where you cover and why you cover? I love your nuance, which is, how do you separate what is truly needed for safety versus how do you break down those walls and start to bring out because the amount of effort it takes to cover. Since I have started to break away some of the areas that I've covered, I've had so much more energy for focusing on other things, focusing on the work I'm doing. But I've also had so much less anxiety, so much more calmness and groundedness. And my brain is able to think for the first time instead of rushing into things. And the reflectiveness and the thinkingness is really quite amazing.
And spending your time and energy on the things that matter.
Yeah. And then knowing where your energy flow is positive. This is where I get energy from. This is where I don't get energy from. And how do I fuse those together to make a positive experience?
Yeah, I hope you don't mind me saying what you talked about in building a team and that sense of safety and security and challenge. I always felt like that with you when you were my boss. And I know that I challenged you, but we had that relationship and that was fantastic. But you allowed that.
Yeah.
You allowed me to challenge you. You allowed me to challenge not just you, but a project or a plan or something that was going on. You fostered that in the team, which is really, really powerful. And also, I would say, because I've known you for many, many, many years now, I can see when you're covering.
Oh, of course.
You can see it in other people. And my absolute favorite moments with you when you were my boss is when you weren't.
Yeah.
Because those were the moments of real bonding and me seeing Simon, not Simon, my boss, and those moments of real human connection and honesty and vulnerability and sharing. If you allow yourself to take the mask off a little bit or not do the covering, we need an opposite. What's the opposite word?
I know. It probably is in the book, but I just don't remember.
But when people do the opposite of the covering, it's usually a beautiful moment.
It is.
Because it's vulnerable and it's real and it's raw and it's you. Yeah. And isn't that nice?
But it has to be total safety for someone.
Yeah.
It has to be total acceptance and safety. And is a rare thing in this world. Even if you look at the world around us, not just the corporate world, the world around us, there's so much flying around everywhere, and I see it. And I used to get so concerned about the tension, and now I'm like, it's there, I recognize it. How am I going to respond to that tension? What do I do? What's in my power that I can do something about? Yes, I can try and create a team environment. And thank you very much for saying that about those teams. 15 years ago, though, I didn't have any idea what I was doing, so I was just making it up. But,
well, maybe that's why it was so good, because you weren't going, this is what I'm meant to do as a boss, and here's let me get my little manual out and say, this is how. No, because you were doing what you felt was right. And I always think people's instincts around leadership are usually right, because especially if it comes from a place of honesty and truth and vulnerability and realness and humanness, I don't think you can go far wrong.
No, it's so true. You're exactly right. I just hope that we continue to head in a direction where more and more of that becomes available and becomes the norm. Because
I hope so.
It's still not. We have a huge journey to go, and I don't feel sad or disappointed about the progress or lack of progress we've made. I feel happy, as you say. All of these things have got to start with a ripple. They've got to start with one person, and every one of us can start to think about, what am I covering? What am I doing? Why? And how do I make it safe for other people to truly, particularly in a corporate environment? I think it's true anywhere in our lives, to be honest, but in the corporate world, the number one asset any company has is the people. I don't have any facts or figures, but I think most people are operating at very limited capacity simply because there's a lot of wastage or a lot of capacity going to how do I survive? How do I thrive? How do I survive in this environment, let alone thrive? And I don't believe anybody thrives until they truly find what's right for them, what's right for the organization, what's right in the work, and those things come together. And you're in the right team. Those things are critically important. And it shows up in the work. I look at work in the marketplace and I can see the team behind that work. I can see that they are.
You can feel it, can't you?
And then you look at other, like it's chaos, and you totally know that that team is chaos. Look at a brand in a supermarket and how it presents itself, and you can kind of look and this is cohesive. It's having a point of view and it's beautiful. I can imagine the team behind it. And then you look at brands where it's chaos. They launch a new range and it looks nothing like, and it's like, wow, I can totally see it probably be developed by two different teams, or worse still, same team, but just with chaos.
Yeah.
And that is one of the key learnings I've had is how effective the team is internally shows up in how effective the team is externally.
Yeah. I've never thought about it like that, but now you've said it, I'm like, yes. You can see it. You can see the brands that have really got themselves together and they're firing on all cylinders, and you see them going almost beyond the brands, but in a great way.
Yeah.
Wow. I think you're absolutely spot on with that.
Totally true. And I think there's a link between all these. It starts with you, then the team, or you and then others, then the team, and then ultimately it influences on the outside world. So what does it all come back to? It all comes to me and how am I showing up and what am I doing and how do I take responsibility? There have been times in my career where I have been squarely in victim mentality. I'm in a role that just wasn't right, working for a team or a boss where I didn't fit. I just go, oh my goodness, this is not right. And it's all everybody else's fault. As soon as I shifted, and then you have a choice. You can get off the bus, go somewhere else. And in some cases, I do that. And actually, I had to do it because I got myself so stuck. But there are other times when you go, well, hang on a minute, what's within my power? How can I survive in this environment? Maybe it forces me into covering more, but how do I survive in this environment? Or how do I actually go, why am I here? That doesn't happen by chance. There must be something that I am here to bring to this team and this organization, and figuring that out can often release the anxiety or the tension. And I mentioned earlier on, was I running away from something or running towards something? And literally running away. I'm like, get me out of here. Other times I'm running towards. It was actually about 15 years ago where I said, I've got to stop running away from things. And I've got to start running towards things. And I've got to start going, okay, why is there something here that's forcing me or repelling me in a way? And actually, what could I learn from that? What if I sat in it for a bit? What if I let it breathe? Sometimes that learning for me comes from the breathing space.
It's so beautiful. And you know what? This is what I absolutely love about the ripple impact, because when I talk to guests, I feel like I know where the conversation's going to go, and I have my constructs, and we're going to talk about insights. And we haven't talked about that once. And you know what? I love it.
That's good on occasion, but yeah.
We have, because we talked about consumer psychology, we talked about behavior, we talked about psychological safety and the mentality and psychology of a pack and how people work together. So we have, but this has been more beautiful. And I think that's what's lovely about the ripple impact concept, which is why I called it this, is that when people reflect on their own stories, these things come up where people are like, wow, I didn't realize. And oh gosh, that person and that moment. And then what you've done is look more broadly and go, actually, the ripple impact overall of covering and my identity and safety and these moments in my career that have shifted what I've done and run away from what run towards. That's what's beautiful about the ripple impact, is that it's these moments that either cumulatively or in one big splash can fundamentally change people's leadership, their careers, what they want to do in the world. And I think that's what's so lovely about these stories. So thank you, because I was expecting a conversation on insights and what we talked about with psychological safety, and I love that.
But I want to come back to where we started the entire thing about that working for that tea company. I was probably about 10 years into my career at that point. So I'd spent a lot of time exploring, and I landed at that place and I stayed there for 3 years actually, which when you're early in your career, 3 years feels like a lifetime. The guy who set up that business, he's now since passed away. but he really is an inspiration to me. Even to this day, I often think, what would Merrill do? And his story was something that stuck with me. And I kept thinking, I don't want to be him, but I want to be more like him. I want to take things that he does. So he used to work for big name tea companies. You know them. They're on the shelves all over the UK and around the world. And he got so frustrated with offering what he saw as inferior product for cost-cutting measures or for other measures. Like, there's got to be a better way. So he took a risk and he went, I'm going to go up against them. And he called it cutting out the middleman. I'm going to cut out these guys and I'm going to go direct as a tea grower. And go direct to the consumer. But he didn't just go and say, I'm going to cut out them and take all the profit for me. It wasn't about that, actually. He set up fair trade agreements even long before we had the fair trade terminology. And he was really looking at the full end-to-end ecosystem. And this is something that's really important to me, the sustainability of our life and our world. And I still look at him today and I still think, what would Merrill have done when I'm faced with something? And I just think, for all of us, finding people, there are a handful of people in my life that I keep in my head like that, and every time I'm faced with something, I pull up the relevant one out. What would this person do? Finding those people in your world and life. And did I agree with everything he did? No. Did I agree with how he went about? No, but I learned a lot from him, and I will take his philosophy with me as I move forward.
That leads me into my final question, which is, what advice would you give aspiring wave makers? We ask all our guests this because you are a wave maker in the industry and we want to inspire the next generation of wave makers. So what advice would you give to them?
I'm going to answer this in two parts. I'm going to answer to what advice do I give to other wave makers, other leaders, and really spend some time thinking about how are you showing up, and be really honest with yourself about what you're covering and why. What and the why is really important, because we all cover. We do it all the time. All of us, everywhere. We show up somewhere to a group of people we've never met before. We present ourselves in a way that it happens all the time, and it's never going to go away. But think about how you're manifesting that in the workplace, and then know that through your covering, how do you bring the vulnerability forward to make others feel safe and welcome? So that's for the current leaders. I think we have a responsibility. I believe I have a responsibility for the little versions of me out there that, that are on a journey that I was on. I can only reflect on my journey. How do I enable them so that they can move through that journey in a better and more safe way? For the aspiring wave makers, be the meerkat. And I don't mean be the meerkat, but I don't mean be the meerkat, look out for safety. Constantly look. Lift your head up out of what you're doing. Look around. Go ask yourself the question, am I really happy doing this? Is this really me? If not, then go and find things that are. I made minor steps, all of my steps. I didn't go and quit my job and run to the other side of the world and do something else. I literally went, oh, that person's doing an interesting job. I wonder how I could go and do some more of that job. And I did it within the safety, within the financial safety that I required. It can be anything from a simple little, that's interesting, how do I do that, to actually a complete pivot. And when you find what you're passionate about and what you love it, do it with everything, every single part of your being, because we only have one job, and that's to be us, and no one else can do it. And frankly, if you find that, if you're lucky enough to find that early on in your career, then go for it. If you're like me and you're still searching, and I found something I loved when I moved into this world, and I love it, but I'm still searching for how do I make it better and more impactful for me. Just do it with all your heart. So they'd be my two things for wave makers.
Amazing. Simon Pollock, thank you so much for taking us behind the ripples of truth, consumer behavior, from answering tea phone calls in customer care lines to covering and where it serves you and where it doesn't. Your story of pronouns and standing up and having a voice and living your authentic self reminds us that tiny moments, a letter in a box, a shift in mindset actually can lead to something much, much bigger. From covering to courage, Simon's story shows that ripples we don't see sometimes. Identity, safety, silence, small acts can often shape the biggest waves in business and in life. So Simon, thank you so much. That is a wrap on this Ripple episode. Don't forget to follow and subscribe and tune in for more weekly bold voices and inspiring wavemaker guests. And if you're looking to elevate the human storytelling of your brand, please get in touch with us at Ripple Impact so we can see how we can help your business. I'm Laura Barber. This is the Ripple Impact. We will see you next week. Thank you so much, Simon. It's been amazing as always.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. See you next week.